So for the agenda tonight, Lucy, I noticed that there isn't necessarily something on here for a discussion of future meeting times, but is that something we could add as an agenda item for just everyone's mutual availability?
Yep, we will discuss that
Awesome.
at the end.
I want to make a remark that acoustics in this room is not great. So sometimes we may hear what each other's saying and sometimes we don't.
Yeah,
Not a good acoustic room.
it's terrible. I couldn't
Yeah.
hear you.
I didn't,
You couldn't hear me? Yeah.
No, it's echo here.
I didn't want to be that bad, Ken, but you're right. It's
Yeah, so sorry, I will speak louder and more in this direction. I was suggesting that in addition to the agenda that we have here in our packet, that we also discuss a future meeting time that works for everyone's schedules.
Sure.
Sweet. Awesome. That sounds great. So this is our agenda for the evening. We can start with some introductions. Lindsay will do a History Colorado training. We're going to go over the responsibilities of the Historic Review Committee according to our updated ordinance, and discuss the Historic Review Committee's rollout timeline. And that discussion topic will include a time for us to talk about scheduling for future meetings and then for regular meetings. So I was thinking we could start by introducing kind of the staff that you'll interact with through this committee. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen so we can see everyone's faces. Let's see, we can go like this. Okay. So you all know me at this point, but I'm Lucy. I am kind of our in-building staff representative. I'm the community development coordinator. And I will kind of organize meetings. I'll be sending you guys emails. I take in application inquiries. I process applications internally, and I coordinate with our Historic Review Committee members, with our applicants, and with CPS. CPS is our contracted planners, which includes Chris and Sheila. So Chris and Sheila, do you want to go ahead and just introduce yourselves real quickly?
Yeah, I'll go first. My name is Sheila Booth. I am, as she said, the contracted planner. We're with Community Planning Strategies. So we help out Lucy as needed, and as these applications come in, we'll be taking a look at them, doing the review, writing up the reports, making recommendations. Chris will be your main point of contact, so I'll let him take it on next and talk and do his own little introduction.
Thanks, Sheila. You mentioned most things. So my name is Chris Masser. I'm also with CPS, and I do a lot of the behind the scenes review of plans. I'll be creating all of the staff reports and contacting you guys if needed. And I am also one of the contract town planners.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So you guys will be hearing from Chris and Sheila at regular meetings. They facilitate our pre-application meetings. They do the review of our applications, they write our staff reports, and they present applications and staff reports as needed to the Planning Commission, the Board of Trustees, and the Historic Review Committee. And I was thinking if we all just want to go around, it sounds like we don't all know each other, and Chris and Sheila haven't met you all yet. So if we all just want to go around really quickly and just say your name and maybe a sentence or two on why you wanted to be a Historic Review Committee member, or why historic preservation is important to you. And we can start with Jessie and just go around.
Sure. So I'm Jessie Rowe, for those of you I don't know. And I recently underwent the historic review process for my non-historic building in the historic overlay district, which was, I felt, a confusing and inconsistent process. And I am very much of the opinion that if you want to see something improved, not to complain about it, but instead to participate in the process of making it better. So that's why I'm here.
My name is Maria Zamora, and I grew up in Silverton. I'm a historian. I have a keen interest in preserving our town, the uniqueness of our town, and helping to make sure that that happens in the future.
Hi, I'm Melissa Childs. I was elected by the Planning Commission to be on this committee.
I'm Ken Safransky, and I've been on the planning commission a long time and involved in the building industry since the 70s. And my interest is, recognizing that Silverton has two periods of historic or architectural history. One early on with board and batten, and another with more Victorian or Edwardian elements. And I'm just the alternate for the planning commission, but my interest is in making this process navigable for the individual and keeping the town authentic without being like a Tombstone or a Jamestown.
My name is David Pollett. I'm a geoscientist. We've had a property in town for almost 10 years. We live over by the Catholic Church on Reeds. And we just moved here full-time this year for our daughters to go to school here. So when I moved here, I wanted to contribute to my community. I wanted to seek opportunities to do that. And I share Jesse and Ken's sentiment to make the process as easy as possible while maintaining the uniqueness of Silverton, which I think is something we all love. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks.
I'm Mike Ariak. I've been here a mere 51 years. No, that's a slight exaggeration. In a few days, it'll be 51 years.
I got you beat.
You got me beat. Okay, good for you. That's very few people that have me beat, and Ken's got me beat already.
6 months.
By 6 months. Okay. I've always had an interest in historic value. That's what I call it. It's not a correctness or anything else. It's a value. We have a very great value in this town, and it's called the history of Silverton and San Juan County. I've tried to get involved in that when I was president of the Blair Street Historic District Association for about 10 years, and tried to keep everything. And we were mainly concerned about Blair Street. We tried to keep off every modern affectation that we possibly could off the street. That was one of our main jobs. And Bev Rich, who we all know, certainly agrees with that. We'd like to see a town where Bev and I have always half jokingly, half seriously said, we would like to see Blair Street stay so authentic that if a movie company came in here, all we'd have to do is take the cars off Blair Street and they could film their movie. But Bev and I feel the same way about that. Anyway, I have the historic interest, luckily for me, having been here a while. So I've met, quote unquote, all the right people, Alan Nosserman, Fritz Klinke, Bev Rich. So when you get to talk to those people, you really know what's going on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Chris and Sheila both have to hop off, so I will let them do that whenever they want. But Lindsay, if you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit about History Colorado, and then I think we can get into our Historic Preservation 101 training.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Lindsay Flewelling. I'm a preservation planner and the certified local government coordinator at History Colorado. Which the certified local government program I'll talk about a little bit, but it's essentially my job is to work with local governments on their preservation programs. And History Colorado is a state agency that contains the State Historic Preservation Office for Colorado. So we do all sorts of programs associated with historic preservation. And like I said, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you guys have any questions before we go into the training?
I just have a comment. Would we be able to make the picture larger so that we can see them?
That would be nice.
Their cameras aren't on.
Oh,
You mean the people on the
yeah,
screen?
yeah.
Yeah, they don't have their cameras on for us to
Oh,
see their
okay.
faces.
Sweet. Okay, well, Lindsay, I have your presentation if you need me to pull it up. If not, feel free to just pull it up and share your screen if you have permission. And then we can go ahead and get started.
I can't share my screen. I don't know if you could switch me to
Okay.
I can't remember what it's called, a participant or something, or a panel member.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. OCM panelist.
I think you just have to make her a panelist, Lucy.
She actually is already a panelist.
Oh, okay.
And we try one more time, and if not, I can share it.
I don't even have the button.
Oh, you don't have the button. Okay. Okay, I will share it if that's okay with you, and then if you just want to tell me when to hit next slide, if that works for you.
That should work.
Okay, awesome. Next second. Okay, is that working for you, Lindsay?
Well, I can see the like it's not in presentation mode, but
Not in presentation mode. Okay, 1 second.
or if you just go to slideshow.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, is that working for you now?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay, sweet.
Great, thank you. So tonight I just wanted to give a brief overview of the history of US historic preservation programs, including the Certified Local Government Program, talk about different elements of local preservation programs, and then go over defensible decision-making and commission member ethics. So next slide. So to start with, what is historic preservation? It's the study, documentation, designation, protection, and physical preservation of buildings, structures that might include things like bridges and water towers. Could also include mining structures in Silverton. Sites that could include sites associated with archaeology, battlefields. It could be mining sites as well. Objects, those are things like statues and fountains. And we also just recently had a mural designated as an object. So if you have any historic murals, that's a possibility. And then districts, which are collections of all these other types of resources. Next slide. So why do we preserve buildings and all these other types of cultural resources? A lot of the reasons would be specific to you and your community. But some of the things that we hear are to help increase community identity and pride, reduce waste. You don't have demolished buildings go to the landfill, revitalize historic downtowns, help to encourage heritage tourism, help generate jobs in downtown areas. It can help to increase property values and then support small businesses and create affordable housing in properties that already exist. Next slide. So for a quick background on the development of the United States preservation programs, preservation really started by women's groups and individuals trying to preserve properties associated with prominent individual people, like Mount Vernon, for example, was not preserved necessarily for its architecture, but preserved because it was associated with George Washington. And it eventually transferred from these private groups really supporting preservation to the US government around 1900, when there started to be a lot of concern over looting of archaeological sites, like Mesa Verde, for example. And that's why we now have our federal historic preservation programs through the Department of the Interior, because it was originally concerned, the preservation programs were originally concerned with protecting these archaeological sites. And so our framework for preservation goes through the National Park Service. And we also have policies set by the Department of the Interior, known as the Secretary of the Interior Standards. In the mid-1900s, there was a big change in the United States with a lot of downtowns in cities, seeing people, leaving for the suburbs, and then a lot of highway construction and interstate construction through those downtowns, and then urban renewal projects, as well as downtowns were kind of emptying out. So there was a big push to try to preserve more of those historic downtown areas. And that helped to lead to the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966, which sets a national policy for preserving our heritage throughout the United States. It creates a partnership between the federal government and the states and tribes. And it was also amended in 1980 to add local partnerships through the Certified Local Government Program. Next slide. So here you can see sort of the different tiers of preservation programs in the United States. At the federal level, like I said, we have our preservation programs governed by the National Park Service. Each state has its own state historic preservation office, which is History Colorado in Colorado. And then at the local level, there are county and municipal historic preservation commissions. And then at each of those levels, you will also have nonprofit advocacy groups, such as the National Trust for Historic Preservation at the federal level. At the state level, we have Colorado Preservation, Inc. and also Colorado Historical Foundation that are our statewide nonprofits. And then you might have a local historical society or local historic preservation advocacy groups as well. And then one important thing I wanted to note on that slide, was that the protections that you get for historic properties really come in at the local level. Being on the National Register for Historic Places or the State Register for Historic Properties are really honorary designations and don't have any regulation or protections associated with them, unless you're seeking federal funding for a project. But at the local level, you are able to determine if you want regulation and what level of protection you want to have for historic properties in your area. So this framework is really set up to give local community control over their own local area. And that's why you guys are so important in determining what the processes look like and what you actually want to focus on as far as like regulation or incentives or being more honorary. That's really up to you as a commission and as part of your town. Next slide. So the program that I run at History Colorado is the Certified Local Government Program. It's a local government partnership between the National Park Service at the federal level, the State Historic Preservation Office at the state level, and then local municipalities and counties. So it's a group of towns, cities, and counties that have passed preservation legislation that meets state and federal guidelines, and essentially the state and federal government have certified that local government's program meets those guidelines. So that's where the name comes from. Even though it's kind of a vague name, hard to tell what it's referring to. Currently, there's 68 certified local governments in Colorado and about 2,100 CLGs nationwide. So if you do the math, we have a pretty robust program for a state of our population size. We have mostly municipalities, as you can see, but 8 county CLGs as well. And there are a number of benefits to the Certified Local Government Program. History Colorado is granted a certain amount of funds from the National Park Service, and we are required to spend 10% of those funds on subgrants to our certified local governments. And that's money that can't go anywhere else, so it has to be subgranted to the CLGs. We do grants every year for preservation projects that benefit your local historic preservation program. As well as scholarships so that Historic Preservation Commission members can go to conferences and other educational opportunities. Another benefit is that if you're a certified local government, your locally landmarked properties are eligible for state residential and commercial tax credits, which are worth up to 35% in rural areas. So it's a really great program. And then there's lots of support from the State Historic Preservation Office as well. On the flip side, there are some responsibilities that go along with it, like you're required to enforce your own local preservation ordinance and maintain a commission, provide for public participation in your meetings, maintain a system of survey, attend at least one training per year, and then submit an annual report. So that's the CLG program in a nutshell. Next slide. Next, I wanted to quickly go over some elements of local preservation programs to keep in mind as you're really shaping your preservation program moving forward. So those are the Historic Preservation Ordinance, survey, designation, design review, incentives, and then advocacy and public education in your local area. Next slide. So the first step to your historic preservation program is your ordinance. It's really important to know what's in your ordinance. This outlines your powers and duties. It defines your relationship with your governing body. It provides processes and criteria for designation and design review, and what required public participation there might be. And then it often includes additional powers as well. And I know from Lucy telling me that your ordinance is sort of a work in progress, but I'm always happy to answer questions about that. And we also have model ordinances to look at. And of course, the other local governments around the state have ordinances that can be used as models as well, if you're interested. But the key thing, like I said, is to know what's in your own ordinance and to know that that can be shaped over time to create a historic preservation program that will work best for you and your community. Next slide. So the next element of your local preservation program is survey. This is the ongoing process of locating and describing cultural and historic resources in your local area. And essentially it lets you know what you have. So, if you don't know what you have in your local area, then you can't do preservation activities. And that's why survey is so important. And it's important to keep up with it over time because in a lot of our areas, the resources will have changed over time, either from people doing rehabilitation projects and sort of fixing them up, or neglecting properties potentially. And then there's always new properties that might become eligible for historic designation, especially in Colorado, where we had this huge wave of mid-century construction with all the people moving in, as well as auto tourism. There's a lot of different types of survey. So you can have architectural survey where you're looking at buildings. You can do that at a reconnaissance level, which is a broad overview of properties in your local area, or intensive, which is looking really closely at the history of each property. You can also have archaeological surveys, which have multiple classes available, where you're looking at high level versus really digging deep down into the archaeology as well. There's additional preservation tools that might be helpful. So going along with survey are historic context studies. That's essentially a history of your local area that's tied to the built environment. So for example, earlier you mentioned 2 periods of significance. And so a historic context study might go in depth into those 2 different time periods and then have example buildings that go along with it. So it's tying the history to the buildings. And then additional tools are preservation plans, which is a plan that gives an overview of your goals for your historic preservation program. And then survey plans, which it's essentially like dividing up the map of your town and prioritizing survey in different areas. Next slide. So the next element of historic preservation programs is designation. This is recognition through listing on a historic register. We have the National Register of Historic Places, the State Register of Historic Properties, and then local designation, which can include individual landmarks as well as historic districts. Eligibility is normally based on significance and integrity, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the criteria should be established in your local ordinance. Next slide. So here we have eligibility that's based on significance and integrity as the 2 pillars. So you have to have both of those pillars in order to be designated. On the one side, you'll have significance, which is basically saying, why was this property important in history? Why are we recognizing it? And then on the other side is integrity. So that's the ability of a property to convey its significance, essentially saying, like, if you were a person, walking down the street during the period of significance for a property, would you be able to recognize that property then and today? So does the property still convey its story? So those are the two things that you're looking at when you're designating properties. And those are, there's criteria for significance for the national and state registers. And then those criteria for integrity are consistent across the registers as well. Next slide. And then the next element of local preservation programs is design review. This will be based on your own local ordinance and the designation of properties. It needs to be consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards, but you can also adopt your own design guidelines. And design review is essentially where you're looking at alterations to a property, relocation, or demolition. So it's the process that you follow to determine if what the property owner is proposing is appropriate for your local area. Next slide. So the framework that we use on a nationwide level for design review are the Secretary of the Interior standards. There are actually 4 different standards, but the most commonly used ones are the standards for rehabilitation. They are meant to ensure that the character defining features of a property are maintained while allowing for a new use. You know, if a property in the past never had an inside bathroom or something like that is totally understandable and allowed under the Secretary of the Interior standards to put in a bathroom. You're allowing for modern use of the property while still maintaining its character defining features. So these standards are a framework and guidance for maintenance, repair, and replacement of historic building materials, as well as designing new additions or making alterations. And you can see there's just these 10 standards. They do have to apply to, you know, every type of building in the country. So they're pretty vague, but they're meant to guide how decisions are made about rehabilitation and alterations to properties. Next slide. The next part of a local preservation program are incentives. We have a variety of incentives at the state and federal level. So at the federal level, we have a rehabilitation tax credit for commercial properties of 20% for all projects. And then that's just for properties that are on the National Register. At the state level, we have the State Historic Preservation Tax Credit, which I already mentioned is 35% if you're in a rural area. And that can be for commercial or residential properties. We also have the State Historical Fund that would be for properties listed at the local, state, or national level. Usually the property needs to have some kind of public benefit in order to get grants from the State Historical Fund. And then there's also a statewide revolving loan fund through the Colorado Historical Foundation. Now at your local level, you can have a wide variety of different incentives that you might offer. Most of them do require having provisions for them through your local town budget. So that might be kind of a barrier to adopting some of these incentives, but there might also be some procedural things that you can use as incentives, such as exemptions and variances through your zoning process as well. And then also offering technical assistance potentially to property owners. So thinking about like how you can incentivize preservation and you know, maybe make things a little bit easier for property owners to follow any guidelines is, I think, really valuable to your program. Okay, next slide. And then this is the final slide on your elements of local preservation programs. It's advocacy and public education. So this is both within your own town as well as out in the community. And I think it's great that you have some planning commission members on your committee so that you can really be in tune with what the planning commission is doing, as well as, you know, them knowing what you're doing. Because of course, historic preservation programs should be really closely tied to the same goals as the planning commission. And then it's also important to make sure that your town board knows what's going on with historic preservation. And then there's also ways to foster public education and foster community pride and ownership over historic resources in your local area. There can be, you know, celebration of successful preservation projects, having different events or workshops, using social media to promote the history of your local area, and then also celebrating Preservation Month, which is every May. Next slide. Okay, now changing gears to talking about defensible decision-making and commission member ethics. It's really important to know about your own guiding documents as a committee. And I already spoke about knowing your own ordinance, but also knowing what's in your bylaws, which you'll be adopting soon. The Roberts Rules of Order, which are sort of the fallback if your bylaws don't cover a specific situation. Your own design guidelines and design standards. And then, as I said, the Secretary of the Interior standards, which are a more general fallback if a specific situation isn't covered in your own design guidelines. It's also really helpful to have your survey documentation or National Register or local register nominations, because those will help to define the areas and periods of significance and can help to define any character defining features that you want to make sure to protect as you're going through the design review process. Next slide. Those guiding documents and standards are the basis for your meeting conduct and how decisions are made. You should be able to point to the applicable standards and guidelines for each decision that you make, and that's how you achieve defensible decision making. Commission members should try to stay within the purview of your committee. I've had some commissions that sort of go off the rails and start asking questions about things that they have no say over, which is just really not appropriate, especially questions about like funding of projects and things like that. Decisions should not be made based on personal taste. And it's also important to make sure that you're not giving the impression that you're making decisions based on personal taste. Like one commission I was staffing, one of the commission members really hated the color red. And she would say that whenever a project that involved the color red came up. So it made it seem like she was judging the project based on her hatred of a color. But that's, just not an appropriate way to base your decisions. And then as you're making decisions, remember that the applicant and their representatives are there to produce a desired result. So you should analyze their assertions carefully. Next slide. So it's really important to follow all relevant open meetings laws, which would include the Colorado Sunshine Law. It's important to follow your agenda and to stay within the bounds of the topics that are before you on the agenda. That way the public knows what's going to be discussed and if they want to attend the meeting or not. You should not meet outside of the public view as a committee. That would be 3 people or a quorum, depending on what number is lower. And 2 or more members should not discuss items related to a public hearing outside of the public meeting. Emails can be about logistics and non-substantive, but not about the merits of a case or public hearing. And then executive sessions for legal advice are an exception to the Sunshine Law. Next slide. So when you're conducting a public hearing, it's normally a quasi-judicial process, so it has the hallmarks of the court case, meaning that it's an issue of law. Essentially, you need to know what the property owner proposes is within the bounds of the law or not, and that would be your municipal code and any adopted guidelines. Due process includes the right to be notified, to present, and to be able to present an argument, to have legal counsel, and to cross-examine any witnesses. So it's important that your property owners and applicants are aware of their rights and able to attend the meetings and have the ability to present their case. As far as conducting your public hearings and meetings, you should always maintain control and decorum in the meeting, treat people equally, allow for relevant public comment, and you can take written comment into account, but it should be weighed appropriately because you can't question that person and the property owner can't respond to them directly either. Decisions should be based on what happens during the hearing, the evidence and testimony presented, but not personal bias or outside conversations. You should think about precedents and provide clear explanation if you're differing from any precedent that's already been set. And then relate any findings back to the code, guidelines, or standards and apply those to the facts of the case, making sure to record each decision and the findings that it's based on. Next slide. For conflicts of interest, just feeling uncomfortable, not wanting to offend your neighbors, that's not a valid reason to recuse on a controversial topic. Being a member of a town board appointed committee means that you have an obligation to participate unless there's a bona fide conflict of interest. A legal conflict of interest would include if you or a close family member have financial benefit from a project. And you should also refrain from accepting gifts or favors under any circumstances where it might appear to influence your judgment. Next slide. Ex parte communications. I feel like this is a big issue that a lot of local governments in smaller communities have. So it's important to keep in mind that if you're approached regarding a case, you should stop the conversation as soon as possible and refer the person to the staff or to the commission meeting. And commission members should never speak on behalf of the whole commission or advise applicants on approval or disapproval outside of a public hearing. Next slide. So once you're in the public hearing, you'll be making a motion on whether to approve with conditions, continue, or deny a project. It's really important to record the criteria that you're basing the motion on. That criteria would be found in your own design guidelines, your ordinance, or the Secretary of the Interior standards, or all three. Because the property owners have a right to appeal, it's important to explain why you're voting the way you are, establishing and articulating your reasoning and rationale. And then your meeting minutes, the application, and everything in your application packet, including the staff report, is part of the record on that property and that public hearing. Next slide. So just to wrap up, I have a list here of incongruous behaviors of commission members. So the first one is attending the meeting in body only, which means you don't really participate even though you're on the committee. You're on the commission because of what you have to offer. So make sure to ask relevant questions, participate in discussion, help formulate motions, be aware of the facts of the case and your own guidelines and standards. And you should never recuse yourself unless there's a bona fide conflict of interest. Second, coming to the meeting unprepared to discuss the application. So you should always look at the applications and packet prior to the meeting and be aware of relevant guidelines. And site visits may also be helpful prior to meetings. If you want to schedule those as a group, you would just include that on your agenda. You can say right before the meeting, everybody is going to a site visit, or you can do those individually to make sure that you know and can picture what is happening at a property. 3, not acknowledging the public at meetings. All of your comments are on the public record, and for the public record, comments should be addressed to the room and not just to the side to fellow commission members. 4 is assuming too much. If an application is incomplete, don't assume what they meant to put in. The burden is on the applicant to provide enough information to reach a decision. If the application needs to be continued, make specific requests to the applicant to provide details. 5 would be concealing a conflict of interest or incorrectly using conflict of interest. 6 is participating in side conversations. All conversations should be for the public record. Meetings should be conducted in an orderly manner with questions and discussions only when called upon by the chair. And it's the duty of the chair to maintain an orderly meeting. 7 is including facts that don't support your decision. Decisions must be based on findings of fact, and including long lists of facts that don't support your decision can open the door to an appeal. So make sure you're focused on the relevant facts of the case. 8 is asking questions and finding facts that are outside of the commission's purview. The commission's statutory powers are limited. Do not ask questions about issues outside of the scope of the commission's authority. That could include things like interior spaces if you don't review interiors as a commission, and like I said, funding of projects and things like that. 9 is attempting to design by committee. If a design is totally inappropriate or incongruous, then deny it or defer the application. Resist the temptation to be a designer for the applicant. Minor suggestions on how to bring presented designs into compliance within the guidelines are fine, but you shouldn't be like redoing an entire project as you're conducting a meeting. And then 10, using language that makes it seem like the decision is based on personal opinion rather than the guidelines. Personal opinions may be valid, but they must be presented in the context of your guidelines and standards. And don't give the applicant the impression that your decisions are arbitrary. Next slide. So this is just my contact information. You know, I work with certified local governments, but I'm happy to be a resource for any questions that any local governments have. So if you need any resources or have questions about specific things, feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. Does anyone have any follow-up questions on that? That was a lot of information.
I don't have any questions, but thank you, Lindsay. It was very clear.
No. I know this may sound strange, but are we really a certified local government?
We are not a certified local government. That is part of, you know, our goal. And the reason we separated out the Historic Review Committee from the Planning Commission was so we could be closer to being in compliance with certified local government requirements. As Lindsay noted, our certified local government ordinance, which is required, has come in multiple parts, and will not actually be in effect until our land use code update is completed. So right now we are just preparing for that, so that as soon as the code is updated, we can start the process of becoming a certified local government. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions for Lindsay? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. We will let you go unless you have anything else to add, but really appreciate that training.
Great. Yeah, thanks again for having me, and I'll look forward to seeing how everything goes, you know, as the months go on with the commission.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Great. All righty. Let's see. So we can, I probably have like 20 more minutes of stuff to talk about. Does anyone need to take a break? Like we talked about that earlier. Are we good? Yeah, okay, cool. So Historic Review Committee, according to Ordinance 2308. So that ordinance did a few things. Like I said, the goal is to get closer to becoming a certified local government, but also it separated the Historic Review Committee from the Planning Commission. We adopted new criteria for members. We established updated responsibilities, which we'll go through. And this made the Historic Review Committee advisory, meaning that the Historic Review Committee will review applications and make recommendations to the Board of Trustees. And then Ordinance 2311, which it will be proposed later this year, just allows alternate members. So that just modified the 08 ordinance. So the Historic Review Committee has 10 responsibilities according to that ordinance, and they all have different timelines. So I'll just go through them super quickly. We talked about conducting surveys and doing inventories. That's going to happen after our land use code is adopted and we become a certified local government. Review and determine qualifications for building structures, et cetera, to be nominated for our historic, our local historic registry. So that will happen during the land use code update, and nominations won't begin until after the land use code is updated. Recommendations to the Board of Trustees on guidelines. This will be addressed in the land use code update. And this is something that Clarion is working on. And they have requested a work session with the Historic Review Committee in January, because that is their timeline for updating that. So we will also talk about that and scheduling in a few slides. The Historic Review Committee is to make recommendations on any application for alteration, relocation, demolition within our historic overlay district. Hopefully that will begin in January.
Lucy, is that different to what you said in your email when there was 2 applications for December? Are those now pushed to January?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, those applications will likely not be reviewed in December. Yeah, and I have a slide on our kind of like our timeline of our rollout, so we can review that in a second. Participating in the National Register of Historic Places, that will happen after we achieve CLG status, maintain an online database of resources. That will happen after we achieve the CLG status, and that will be the primary responsibility of staff.
Does the town have a timeline, like an aim for when they want to get CLG?
Yeah, so as soon as possible is kind of our goal. So to become a certified local government, you have to have adopted the certified local government ordinance, and that will be incorporated in the land use code update. So once that happens, we're gonna try and get all of our, basically our ducks in a row, all of our forms ready, all of our databases ready, and then you submit an actual application, which is reviewed by Lindsay's team. And so I'm working with Lindsay on trying to get that done. We were hoping to do it sooner, but I think it's gonna make a lot more sense to have it done through our land use code update. Public education, Lindsay talked a little bit about that. That'll be really led and organized by staff and assisted by the Historic Review Committee. Unless anyone feels super passionate, like that's something they really want to take on, then we can work on plans for that. But that'll happen most likely after we achieve our CLG status. Advise the Board of Trustees on matters relating to preserving historic character. That is just going to be as needed as this committee feels that recommendations need to be made. Or if someone is to bring an issue they see to the committee. Participate in federal section 106 review. This is when a federal agency funds, license, or permits an activity that may affect cultural resources. The agency must consult with the state historic preservation officer, and the Historic Review Committee would be involved in that interaction. So that will be as needed after CLG status. And then draft and recommend for adoption bylaws, operating policies, procedures. And this is something that we're going to work on ASAP, starting at the December meeting. Okay, those are the responsibilities. Does that make sense? Does anyone have issues with those timelines or kind of who these responsibilities fall onto?
A couple things come to mind for me is we need to remember that this committee only deals with the overlay districts, as far as I know.
But only the historic, not the A-Rod, correct?
Both.
Well,
Both.
I saw something in some recent, that on the December 12th Planning Commission meeting, they were going to discuss putting the A-Rod back on the Planning Commission. So is that not the case?
No, for right now, the Historic Review Committee will be reviewing A-Rod until we can reevaluate the whole historic overlay district versus A-Rod.
A lot of things that need to happen is the nuts and bolts of what the threshold is for someone to trigger this review and compliance requirement.
Anybody in the overlay?
Well, so
How
that's what's
much work
interesting.
they do.
Yeah, I think
Because look at,
Ben's point, what technically
It says
we have a number of
$100.
different ordinances. Well, $500 is a building permit, right? And,
But I think this. is part of
the
building
code,
process.
this is part of the issue with the land use code is it's a little bit conflicted what's actually written in the town code, whether or not you have to come in front of the historic review committee. So
My
the
understanding is
practice,
you have to get a building permit and go through the planning department and you're in the overlay district, then you have to be reviewed.
yes, but that's not written anywhere. That's just been something that Bill McDougal started doing.
Okay.
Right? So that's part of, I guess what I'm trying to highlight is as Lucy is suggesting with the now on the recommendation for operating policies, I mean, I think that's probably something that we would initially want to adopt as a committee is what triggers the process. And
That's
when
my
the-
question.
Yeah, exactly. And right now, that's not necessarily 100%
Well,
determined.
I mean, the building permit triggers the process.
Now, what triggers the process is any exterior alteration, except for something that is, routine maintenance. And it's the question of what is routine maintenance versus what is, an aesthetic alteration.
And when I was building inspector for 14 years, one time, and we did not require building permits for anything that wasn't structural, not just alterations. So I didn't say, well, you need to get a permit to fix your siding. Because what am I looking at as a building inspector? You know, you're just nailing up some boards. So
Sure.
I think it's important that maybe 500, we've always thought 500 was too.
Well,
number.
it's not within this committee's purview to decide what the threshold is for a building permit, which is the $500.
Agreed, but we agree
It's
that the building
separate in the
permit is what triggers the review.
Not necessarily, because as Lucy just mentioned, if you are
Just doing routine
maintenance,
maintenance.
it can be more than $500 and require a permit, but not necessarily require overlay district.
Gotcha, gotcha.
And then
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got to have like a penalty clause or saving clause or some enforcement.
right now, we,
Or it's just you're talking. We had somebody that was supposed to remove their skis from their front of their building after 3 years.
Mhm.
And we just said it. We didn't do anything about it.
It had no teeth, right?
Yeah.
Well, would the
Right.
town have the teeth then to do a stop and desist? Who has the teeth if we don't?
Yeah, that would
And we recommend to the town and to other groups
Mhm.
what we see fit, and then the people with the power would take it from there.
Yeah, no, if someone were to move forward with the project without going to the historic review committee or to go against, the decision made, that would be the code inspector. They would be dealing with that situation. But for now, what we really do is someone comes to either Bevan or I with a project in mind, and if it's anything exterior besides a paint color change, then they have to go through the historic review committee meeting or process. If you're changing your windows, really anything that can be found in the builder's handbook, will have to go through the process.
And we'll need some guidance to make sure that the one overlay district is somewhat strict and the other overlay district is
Lenient.
our
Right.
intention
We're gonna-
at the planning commission. I can't speak for all of them, but that was
Flexibility.
that was our intention, was that it was a general
To keep
architectural,
single wides and steel buildings, et cetera, off of our,
Right.
a general guideline, not
and then it got tied to the builder's handbook was where it all went south. Right, and that was just a mistake.
and we had
This process with Clarion, who will come and meet with you guys and we'll have these conversations. We're gonna completely reevaluate the A-Rod and the overlay zone and what those boundaries are and what the regulations are. They are gonna rewrite and update the design standards, which you all will have a say in. I'll just skip to that slide. And they just released their annotated outline, which is available on the website. I think that was released today. And they talked about the updates they'll be making to the historic overlay district and associated codes, as well as the architectural review overlay district. And we will be reevaluating and updating the districts, the code, the regulations, the process, the design guidelines to conform with both certified local government requirements and what this committee and what the community wants to see there.
So Lucy, just really quickly, my understanding, and keep me honest here, fellow board members, is if we go back to the slides that you had with those items, these are our only codified direct responsibilities that are in writing yet, is essentially that, and Lucy has copied and pasted the direct language in terms of like participate in review of National Register and so forth. So would you go back to the one that says now? So the timing are Lucy's recommendations for us as to what we do first. And from my reading of what you're saying here is you're recommending to us that we make it so that we can hear applications as soon as possible, which involves quite a lot of legwork up front, because technically we haven't recommended policies or other rules of procedure or bylaws as of yet as a committee. Is that correct?
So what we're gonna do basically for right now is right now the tools we have to use are our maps, our code, our design guidelines, and an updated application form. These are all things that are codified that we have to use. So this is what was in like that toolbox that I put in your packet. This is what we have to use until the land use code is updated. We're going to update a form and we're going to create a review process using the design guidelines in our code. But there will not be major revisions to the code until the land use code is updated. So some of these things will not happen until the land use code is updated, and that is okay. That is how it works. There's not a deadline on any of these responsibilities. But what we're going to work on at the same time is working with Clarion to update the policies, the design guidelines, the procedures, so that we can have the best code to use in 2025. Which I know sounds like that is really far away, and it's frustrating, and I totally understand that. I get to interact with this code every day, and I am so excited for a code update. But this is what we have to use for now.
I think we're going to have to use our judgment somewhat, in that presentation, it says, don't use your personal judgment, but I think we got to count on
I
it.
think we can, there's things in writing that we can point to. For example, there is the builder's handbook. It's self-conflicting, awkward, and long, but it says specifically in the town code that is supposed to be a suggested item. That's not something that we necessarily have to adopt and say, we are going to use this problematic builder's handbook.
Because when we are adopting our bylaws and meeting more.
Exactly. Like, so I hear what you're saying, Lucy, and I appreciate the suggestion that we don't adopt anything too new too fast, because Clarion is there to do that for us. But to some degree, we may find that before 2025, we do have to throw out the builder's handbook and put a couple of things in writing.
But it'll be handy reference, like.
Yeah, sure.
Make sure we have the plan and the code and then
Right.
our input.
Right. But because it specifically says in the town code that that's a reference document that you don't necessarily have to conform to, there aren't architectural standards in writing technically anywhere yet, which I think is your point, is like you have to use a certain amount of judgment. That said, what we're trying to move away from is using judgment and instead using an enforceable process. So
What our plan is right now, previously the planning commission kind of had these discussions on how the code requirements compared to the application and the design guidelines and made their decisions that way. Like I said, by 2025, the town will have codified and updated into a more efficient process. For now, town staff and CPS have been collaborating to create an improved process to use until the land use code is updated. And so this will be kind of an additional tool to use during the application review. But to adopt architectural standards, you have to hire a firm to do that, and you have to have professionals do that, and that is what Clarion is going to do. So right now, we are just anticipating on using the current code and the design standards that we've been using until we can have those architectural renderings and really usable guide and tool, which Clarion will be working with you guys to produce. So these are the tools that we have right now. And then for our rollout, we are on meeting 0 right now. Meeting 1, we'll do bylaw adoption, appointments, and then CPS and I will introduce the new form we're going to be using. And then we're going to discuss the review process. So we'll bring a draft and we'll just use that to start our conversation and to hear what you guys want to use. And what kind of the tool you're imagining really looks like. And feel free to reach out to me beforehand, and we can incorporate those ideas into that tool. And then hopefully early January we can meet, and we'll have our final review process done. That'll already be sent out to you. You can just review that yourself, ask me questions, and then we'll just go over it one last time before we do our first application review. And then meeting 3, hopefully also in January at Clarion's request, is going to be the time where we're going to dig into the details and we're going to talk about what we want to see in the updated design guidelines in our process. But that'll be a super awesome meeting where we can just all talk about all of our dreams and goals. And Clarion is a great team and they're going to be really awesome to work with on this. And they're really excited for the historic review portion of this. And then February, if we get any applications, we'll have a regularly scheduled meeting based on the time that we can discuss that works for everyone. Does anyone feel like there's anything missing on here? Does anyone feel like they don't have what they need to move on to our first or second meeting? I'm happy to produce more resources, or if we need to put more agenda topics on meeting 1, I'm also happy to do that.
Is meeting 1 appointments? Is that electing?
That's
Chair,
like
and
the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary.
And Lucy, just to put as a point of clarification about roles and responsibilities, my reading of the ordinance is that this committee makes decisions and directs staff to come back with resources. Is that correct? Just because,
yeah, I would say they direct the board of trustees, or they
recommend
provide recommendations to the board of trustees.
Right. And so wouldn't it be fair to say that in our first meeting, we could choose whether this is the timeline we want to use or not?
Absolutely.
As well as, since we have the 10 things that we are required to do as a body, reviewing those to ensure that your suggested order of how we want to do things and how we work with, for example, Clarion, conforms to how the committee as a whole feels they want to move forward.
Yeah, totally.
Is that, am I understanding roles and responsibilities correctly?
Yeah. So if you want to make like a formal recommendation to the board of trustees, you guys can organize to do that at meetings. I don't know what you mean by work with Clarion.
So my question is, for most of our committees within town, my understanding is that the committee or the board recommends to staff certain decisions, but sets the agenda for meetings and so forth. And so I'm asking if this committee conforms to that standard, or if it's different in that staff sets the agenda and so forth. Because you've made a lot of statements like, and this is just so we're all clear about how we should function in this body. like you've made a lot of statements like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And so I'm wondering, is this a staff directed process or is the committee itself charged with making the choice about what to prioritize and when, for example?
Well, we have not even adopted bylaws yet, so I'm just trying to give us some structure. But absolutely, we can change this rollout timeline. We can add or take off agenda items. We do need to do bylaw adoptions. We do need to do appointments. We do need to decide on a form. I would recommend that we make some decisions on a review process. And we do need to do application reviews. You know, if we want to push them off farther, that's a conversation we can have. I really would recommend against that because the further you push off an application, the more likely you are to face legal issues. So in the best interest of the town, I would really recommend that we prioritize getting an application review done towards January.
Yeah.
But you know, this is me really trying to give us some structure and some things to work out. But this is also an opportunity for you to give some feedback on to if this is working or not working.
Fantastic.
Zero. So
Yeah.
we're gonna kind of get more into it as we go. But if this is not what anyone wants, we can totally amend this.
This is fantastic. I just wanted to ask so that all of us understand our role in working with you. And also if, for example, we said, you know, this is something that's really important. All of us have a lot of time to give. We want to say, do a couple of work sessions before Clarion comes in January, try to like clean up something about the application process or work on one section of the bylaws or whatever we wanted to. Like that would be, say, an option for the committee, for example. Like we as a committee are really the ones who should be choosing what we do and when. And this is your staff recommendation.
Yes, this is my staff recommendation, but and these are all things that can be incorporated into the bylaws. We just don't have bylaws adopted yet, and we need to start scheduling meetings.
Awesome. Okay.
And so this kind of conversation is to schedule meetings, but I'm happy to take, if we want to add agenda items or remove agenda items or add meetings or remove meetings, we can talk about that now. Did you want to propose adding additional meetings?
I think it depends. I mean, I don't want to speak for the availability of everyone here. So my thought would be if there is a discussion to be had about like a consistent meeting time, and perhaps that meeting time is more frequent at the beginning than once a month. And then after we have some kind of process somewhat dialed, the meeting time could be less consistent after that time, during which we meet subject to application review needs. Would be a suggestion I would have, but I don't know that everyone is as excited as diving into this as I am. And would want to come more than once a month initially.
I think if we need additional meetings, that almost speaks for itself. I personally just would like enough notice.
Yes.
When a meeting comes, I don't want somebody telling me that we're having a meeting tonight.
Right.
So when I got a project going on, I need to earn a living. I can't just dead stop something. So I think it just be common courtesy. If somebody thinks that something has to be done, the meetings are important, obviously, but I personally need enough notice.
And I think the important thing is just to get the first one scheduled, since there were some scheduling conflicts, and then see how we get on in that meeting. And I think that'll determine whether we need more frequent meetings.
And I can't find out on a computer. I don't do Facebook or
Neither do I.
Email.
I don't even own a computer.
my wife owns one.
Oh, well, good for you.
Something else about meetings is they told us right here tonight that we should let the public speak. I wonder if there's anybody out there now that has something to say. You know, is there anybody else tuned in?
Yeah, we can check on that. But that will be something that will be adopted via bylaws, and we'll start after bylaws is adopted.
I see Singer.
Want to ask David Singer if he has anything to say?
Well, I'm not the chairman. We don't have,
We don't have a chairperson yet. Yeah,
We don't have bylaws. This is just really like a meeting.
right.
I think if we can all, yeah, I mean, if you guys all.
that was in the rules, you know.
If you all want to agree to ask,
We can do that.
Okay,
This is really like a meeting zero.
I move that we allow until we have bylaws such to allow public comment up to 3 minutes at the beginning and ending of meetings, just like they do in Board of Trustee meetings.
I believe knowing how Silverton works is that once we make some actual decisions by this committee, we're going to hear from the public.
Sure.
That's the
Anyone want to second my motion so we can hear David?
way.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
We will allow for public comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't we? Why don't we just try and get this next December meeting scheduled, and we can worry about all of these other meeting times at a later date.
I have a comment
Mhm,
on the builder's handbook.
mhm.
I have never seen it personally. So should we become familiar with that before the next meeting or at all? Or what's the story on that? I don't feel like I can go forward if I don't know what's in that handbook.
Yeah, so I would recommend becoming familiar with all these tools.
Are they on the website?
These tools are on the website and they were also in the packet that you.
The builder's handbook is in. the
Yeah,
packet?
it's,
Okay.
I can show you.
Because
I noticed you
I
had it.
have it
I
here, yeah.
almost was like turning into your binder here. But it starts on page 49, I think. of the
Oh, okay.
packet. So, yeah. So, I guess with the item that I was suggesting before about the meeting times, I'm just wondering if we could choose like a consistent day of the week and time too, so that it's like consistent for the public as well as for us for just scheduling purposes.
And we can do that now, for sure. That's also gonna be on the agenda for our next meeting, once we have hopefully everyone there. But if you guys want to make a recommendation now, then we can put that on the agenda for the next meeting and just make sure that Shane, who's not here, that also works for him before we confirm it.
Okay. So,
Have something already scheduled for the next meeting?
No, I don't have any dates scheduled.
Bunch of choices.
there's a bunch of,
These are some just idea dates to.
it's affectionately referred to as the builder's handbook.
So for December, I know Jesse will be gone until the 18th. And so I was hoping to have everyone be able to attend, and that just might not happen. So my kind of first thought would be a December 19th meeting, which is a Tuesday, or a December 20th meeting, which is a Wednesday. And I know it's super close to the holidays.
I would comment that not on Tuesday, because that is the planning commission night. And I know that it's normally the third Tuesday and in December it's the second Tuesday. But I would say if we're trying to be consistent, let's not put it on a Tuesday.
And the fire department's Tuesday.
So I would vote December 20 out of those options personally, but I don't,
Yeah. And I think that, we're scheduling meetings around the holidays. People are going to be out of town. I think it's okay if these December and January meetings are not kind of the normal day we do it. And then trying to get consistent starting in February and making a plan for holidays for next year.
I agree.
But I totally hear you that maybe the 20th would be better if that's how people want to do it.
I can make the 18th, 19th, or 20th work.
Yep, 20th works for me.
I can't commit because I'll be gone for a while and
Okay.
I don't have the dates yet.
You don't know the dates. Okay.
And I never know.
Yeah, I don't hardly know either, so I'm just gonna say 20, it sounds fine right now.
Yes.
let's go for it.
Agree.
Okay, cool.
Starting to snow about then.
Let's plan for the 20th. And if you're not able to attend in person, we can do a Zoom option. And then at that 20th meeting, we are gonna do bylaw adoption, appointments. And then CPS will introduce, and I will introduce the new form. Review the talk about process. We'll bring a draft just to go off of, and if we completely change it, that's totally fine. But just kind of a talking point. And then are there any additional agenda items people wanna call for now? We can also make a call for that later if anything else comes up.
Yeah, I think we should set goals, like whether that goal is we're gonna be able to hear applications by February 1st or.
Within 20 days or.
Yeah, I think we should have a plan for what it is we're trying to accomplish I think that alone is something that may take us some discussion.
Sure. A goal to.
I got something a little off the subject, but we're a national historic district.
Mhm.
And our signs are like nationally historic. They're in terrible shape. And I wonder if that was the lady we should talk to. One of these people here, those signs are a disgrace.
Yeah, I mean, I would.
Working on the signs for I know it's been 5 years. I'm a little confused, but.
Talking about.
Well, and that's a huge benefit of becoming a CLG is all of a sudden we have tons of funds. We are able to apply for tons.
I think you need to put that on the back
Well,
burner for.
They give you the sign if you ask them,
Yeah, we can talk to
the
Lindsay.
national.
Yeah, and so that might be an example of like a goal is we might say, we want to explore grant funding sources available to us to.
Which would be an agenda
Historic
item.
signage. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, which would be like a goal for us to have as a committee.
Well, I was saying, let's
Sounds
put
pretty
it,
simple if you just ask for it and they'll give it to you.
I think so.
Phone call tomorrow.
Send it to them.
Since we know
Everything's that easy.
this isn't a real meeting and sunshine laws don't apply, I texted Shane to ask if he could do December 20th and he says he can.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
So
Big,
Thank you for doing that.
big worry over the last few years about signs is not that how we get them or who we get them from. It's the design of the sign.
over.
Is it appropriate for a National Historic District? Is it appropriately historically valuable looking sign? And there was always a lot of disagreement on what is and what isn't, appropriate. And so you go into another town and they might have some kind of a sign that's appropriate to that town, that industry, that what the town does and so forth, like mining signs and so forth. We've always talked about that. I personally would like to see something like that. Pay attention to our own history and convey that in not only what the sign says, but what it looks like. We're a mining town or ex-mining town or railroad town or whatever we consider ourselves to be. So that should be incorporated in the look of the sign. That's what I think.
Yeah, and sign code will also be updated during the land use code update. So maybe we can talk to Clarion about doing a specific historic overlay section of that sign code, and we can talk about that.
Does the sign code apply to the town of Silverton, the municipality?
Oh, yeah.
The town of Silverton sign code,
Right.
because we have our own sign code.
But right, no, I realize the sign code that's in the code. I mean,
Oh, to us.
yeah, because,
Oh, I think so, yeah. I think if it doesn't legally apply, it'd be best practice to.
yeah, okay.
But I think to your point, it only addresses like commercial.
That's right. The
Storefront type
code
signs.
does only
Yeah.
exist.
So maybe that's,
And-
yeah, maybe that's something that we ask Clarion about too. Is if we need to expand.
Because those standards wouldn't necessarily work for
Right,
like the highway. Right.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
yeah, the highway isn't like
A
a
storefront.
percentage of applicable storefront, right? Yeah.
We could also possibly incorporate interpretive signs,
Mm.
different parts of the historic district. Most historic there that we want to highlight.
Right.
A lot of towns have interpretive signs.
Yeah, that's a great point. Can talk to them about that. Okay, awesome.
For the December 20th meeting,
Mm-hmm.
is this time of the day what's best for everyone?
I like it.
Or do you guys
I get up.
clear?
Well, it'll be darker even earlier then.
Yeah, I know.
So I wouldn't want to push it really any.
Yeah.
Too late.
I was curious if anyone has like during the day flexibility, if they would want to do like
I can,
3 p.m. or
I can
like
do
a 9
those.
a.m. or something like that. And so we're not here when it's dinner time.
Yeah, let's figure that out
Good
next
idea.
meeting maybe, but I'm flexible for daytime because I'm
Yeah.
retired.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
It's good for you, but
Yeah.
I'm
so-
retired.
And then also, I mean, you probably worked a full day and you're here, you know, just one meeting that we can have.
Yeah.
Evening. If we're all available. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever works for you guys. Do we want to come up? Why don't I just send out an email confirming the time unless you guys want to come up with the time right now?
For the 20th.
I mean, we could do a daytime. We could, like, the finance committee meets at 9. We could do a lunchtime meeting. We could do like 3 o'clock.
lunch or afternoon would work for me. I don't think morning would work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Me either.
3 o'clock.
Afternoons are perfect.
Yeah. Let's.
After it's the good, 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's do 3 p.m.
on the 20th.
the 20th. And our agenda will be what's listed on the screen plus discussion about goals. And I will send out the meeting packet the Thursday before. So that will be December 14th. Unless anyone objects to that. And it will just have all this information unless anyone needs anything else or wants to incorporate anything else. Yeah.
Would you mind sending the link, Lucy, just to the bylaws and ordinances?
Yeah, there are gonna be new bylaws. We're gonna update the bylaws. I don't know. I think the historic review committee or the historic review committee was just using the planning commission bylaws. Do you know if that's correct?
Well, there was no historic review committee. It was the planning commission.
It was.
So yes, indeed, yes.
I only asked because there's been some reference to bylaws and stuff today, which I'm not personally familiar with. So if I can have that as a base, so I know what people are talking about, then
Yeah, so they're gonna be new ones that we'll write. And I can send them out before the 14th. Yeah.
And the,
People absolutely make comments on that, and request adjustments or amendments, before they're adopted.
the role of the like town board member is to be a liaison to the town board and tell them what's going on or tell them what they need to do. And that same with the planning commission is we'll communicate with the other members of the planning commission
Mhm.
what's happening.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Awesome. Anything else?
Lucy, thank you for all the energy and effort you put into training us. Does this count for our annual training? Or do-
Yeah, I think it does
Okay.
unless you have to go. Unless that's the requirement, you have to go to, one person from the committee has to attend, either a History Colorado or a national, conference. So I'm not sure if that's what you're looking at,
Oh, okay.
but I will communicate all of that information to you as needed.
Yeah, I
Thank
didn't see
you.
these training requirements. You read more better than I did.
Well, yeah, there's a training requirement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the
annual
time
training
with Tiffany, yeah, should count.
Yeah, and if you guys ever feel like you need additional training, DOLA also does really awesome training and they're happy to, you guys have both attended those trainings. And they can come in too. But I want you guys to feel like you have the tools you need to move forward with where we're at right now. So if you guys ever feel like you need additional resources or tools, or you want to reach out to Lindsay, we can do that for sure.
So before we have any processes established, should you receive an application, we would have to hear it under whatever all the code says right at this moment, right?
Which is what we will do in January.
Right.
Right.
Theoretically, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Unless
I have
anything
three
changed.
applications right now.
So you do have completed applications?
Yeah.
Pursuant to the previous planning commission process?
We had so many days.
It's the same right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no new process yet, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been turned
So we'll
after this
under.
ordinance 2308.
Oh, they have been turned in after the ordinance 2308. Okay.
No, we have only so many days before we can review it, right? Otherwise,
We actually removed all of the timelines from the code.
here it said you have so many days.
Yes, so that is another thing to note is I'll give you guys new codes after the new year. Our ordinances don't get reflected into the municipal code until the new year.
Okay.
So that is, yeah, reflected wrong, but we did take out all the timelines and now I didn't have a chance to go through this with you, but this is the staff application review that was adopted, not codified, but it's an internal process that we adopted in lieu of taking those dates out. And so right now we hold a pre-application meeting where we give the applicants an idea of when their application will be heard. And so I've been communicating with all of the applicants on the timeline. They actually all got an email today regarding updated timeline estimates that are subject to change if we decided to change anything in the timeline. But yeah, so just so you guys know, we do a pre-application meeting. They submit the application, we do a completeness check. Sometimes these applications need to go to referral agencies. Sometimes need to get resubmitted, usually not. Then we hold the hearings and then we send a letter of what to do next. And since this has been adopted, application reviews have taken between 20 and 30 days. So this is what the staff uses. Just so you guys are aware of that.
Okay.
I make a motion and we adjourn.
What about the public comment?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, we
that's
did
the-
want to hear from Singer.
Second that.
Okay, David, you have the floor to make public comments.
Starting a timer.
Thanks, Lucy. Good evening, everybody. I want to applaud the town for, getting this CLG process started again, and organizing this committee. And I want to just applaud everybody who's there. I can hear the passion in everybody's voices, and that is something you just cannot train. And so you guys are going to be a great team. I'm really psyched. And with that said, everybody pat on the back. I just kind of want to put out some ideas for maybe some topics of discussion at your future meetings, and maybe just give you an update on some preservation work that's happening right now, so everybody knows what's going on with the State Historic Fund. It was really nice to have Lindsay give us that great presentation there. Very thorough. Anyway, we have 3 grant projects that are going on in our neighborhood that are funded by the state. Just so you know, the courthouse right now is in its final phase of restoration. Some masonry and a lot of interior work was done. And then the Mayflower Mill, the Shenandoah Dives, also has a grant from the State Historic Fund. And we're working on 4 buildings at the top of Red Mountain Pass, the Idorado houses. Just so you guys have an idea, these are State Historic Fund projects with 25% match, 75% grant funding that's been received. And then maybe there's a grant application I'm really excited for the town to pursue, and I'd love it if you guys had your finger on the pulse of it, and that is the preservation of our beautiful Carnegie Library. So there's an April grant round coming up, April 1st, and I know Gloria is probably excited, as is Lucy, I'm sure, for moving forward with the designs that have been developed under a previous State Historic Fund grant. And so maybe that request can move forward in April, and it would be great if the committee was somehow involved with that, or just knew, how that process was moving forward, or was pushing it, or somehow involved. And then I want to talk about 2 wonderful things that are going to happen now that the CLG is going to be established and our ordinance is in place. We started working on this with Bev Kaiser so long ago. And once it is in place, the town is going to be eligible for grants that don't require a match. and two specific projects that I heard talked about this evening. Interpretive signs. We've kind of been doing catch as catch can, where I've had projects that were funded for preservation, had interpretive signs developed. You can see that over at the hospital is probably the best example right in town.
David, you're a bit over
I'll
3
finish up.
minutes. You'll wrap it up, please.
Sure. And then, of course, the survey and inventory. That will be great to continue for the town. And then the last thing that I'll say is, yes, the town does have a National Historic Landmark District status. And so even if there is a building or a project that comes forward for the town that maybe not in the overlay district, it's still something that could come before the committee if it involves historic preservation, and they could be recommendations for guidelines just to help owners with the expertise that you have and you're going to gain as you guys move forward. And with that, I'll say thank you very much for letting me have a comment.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.
David, if you have specific resources for us to consider, I would encourage you to email them to Lucy so she can forward them along, since we don't have like an email address with the town. With regard to grants and ongoing projects that we should be aware of. Thanks for that.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Should we adjourn?
I'd like to make a motion as an alternate.
I second.
That we adjourn.